But I am delighted to say at 20 to 9 on this Friday morning that we're joined in studio by TV3 pundit and rugby expert Matt Williams. A very good morning to you, Matt.
Great to be here, mate.
Thanks a million for coming in.
Pleasure.
It's been a while since I've seen you, so delighted to have you in. Interesting stuff with Joe Schmidt there, and he's, like Gatland has drawn him out a little bit this week in terms of talking about Ireland's, as Gatland would have it, sort of incapacity to play too much rugby. Schmidt adamant that maybe our game has changed a little bit over the last little while. There's been, as there always is when Gatland comes to town, a nice little bit of bubbling under of spikiness ahead of this game tomorrow. Yeah,
Gatty has never forgiven the IRFU for sacking him. What's that? Almost 20 years ago now. You know, so I actually did about I think I did 5 tests. I can't quite remember as defensive coach. I was still coaching Leinster, but I helped with the national side leading up, and it was a couple of games later he was sacked. But Gatty's. Like players and coaches are similar. With experience, you improve, you get better. Unfortunately, you tend to get sacked and kicked out just when you're starting to understand the business. And Gatty's a competent guy. He just plays the game magnificently. So he's deflected all the pressure off Wales and put it back on Ireland. Yet Ireland are 2-0 up, first in the comp. But there's a bit of pressure on Ireland because of the injuries and a few other things. So he's played that game pretty well. And I think Joe does bite a bit on those things. He's a fabulous person, a fabulous coach. And I think he bites because he cares so much. He's passionate for his team. But I think he should, if you don't respond to Gatty, you tend not to get the venom coming through. You know, it's a two-way street.
I've been sort of fairly confident about this game, I have to say, as of about 2 weeks ago. Much less confident and getting more concerned as the days go on. I mean, you've mentioned some of the injuries, 3 lines out from an Irish point of view, and 3, if you look across the 5 key players for Ireland, probably 3 of them are gone, and conversely, obviously 3 coming into the Welsh side. It's becoming, I mean, I'm definitely more concerned as the game approaches.
I'm very worried. I've been watching the odds from the bookies all week, and bookies rarely get it wrong, but I think they're right off the mark for this game. I think Wales should come in slot favourites for the exact reasons you just said. You know, you lose 3 of the best players in the world at their position. You know, Henderson, Henshaw, and then you lose Furlong, who's possibly the best in his position. And they're replaced with a number of very talented but young players. Ireland have, I think it's 7 players under 10 caps. And then you look at our opposition that are coming in, replacing, as you said, with very experienced players. Lions, they've had their own injury crisis. They're coming to the end of that now. They've played exceptionally good rugby against Scotland, dead unlucky, in some ways robbed against England. And I cannot see how they're getting 7.5, 8 start, 9.5 I've heard in some places.
Right.
Against Ireland. I mean, I just don't see that. If Ireland come out of this with 1 point, I'm pretty happy.
Are we a bit, just on that point about the caps, so there's 3 forwards with 6 caps or under, 3 backs with 6 caps or under, and like post the previous World Cup, the big point was we need to get strength and depth here, and we need to build up our squad. Like, we're 18 months out for the World Cup. Are we a bit behind the curve in terms of that plan of having 2 established players for every position?
Injury... you can't, as a coach, you can't control injury, and Joe's just copped a bit there. I do always feel we're a bit behind because we're always under pressure to win games. And if you think, a lot of the Southern Hemisphere teams use the November internationals to blood players. Australia has done it for many years, and Australia's very similar to Ireland, so I'm sort of very fortunate because our resources are so thin in Australia, very similar to Ireland. It's not a deep pool compared to England and New Zealand and South Africa. But I feel here in Ireland there's pressure to win those November series, and everyone celebrates, and Joe did blood a number of guys, but even those big games against South Africa, that's your chance to put 2 or 3 in. And Michael Cheika does it well. Now, he's copped some beatings. And, you know, they got beaten against Scotland. Now as a player sent off, they got beaten by Scotland 50 points. But he's got a much deeper pool at the moment than I think Ireland do as far as experience goes. The talent in Australia is dropping off and will continue to drop off in a number of years, which is a separate issue because we've got so many problems at grassroots level. But here in Ireland, the Six Nations, you've got to win that, and winning it does build for the World Cup. So you're on this 2 streak. You win a Six Nations, that does help momentum for a World Cup. I do think those summer tours and the November internationals, they're the time where you blood them. So, for example, if it was me going to Australia, 18 months out from a World Cup, I'd leave Sexton and Murray at home and say, you had a Lions tour last year, have a good long break, take 6 weeks holiday, have a really good off-season, get nice and strong and fit and healthy, and you blood 4 new sets of halves down in Australia in a 3-test series. It doesn't matter if you lose. It's not that's not the World Cup. The World Cup is coming. So I think there is a strategic way you can approach it. But what happens to the coaches quite often is the IRFU or the bodies that you're working for, every national body, they don't go and say, listen, it's okay to lose.
Absolutely.
They keep pressure on you to keep winning.
Eddie O'Sullivan would have said that fairly regularly, that the pressure during the Six Nations was on, that it wasn't a case of you can go in and blood a few players. But maybe you do get away with that with if there's a summer tour or a November series away a little bit more, possibly. But.
And in the old days, and this is where I think we've failed a bit in professional rugby, they used to play Wednesday fixtures. Now you're seeing a lot of the touring sides, like the New Zealanders are now insisting on Wednesday fixtures on the tour. So they play Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday. And that was always the amateur days tour. And what you would do is you play your young players on a Wednesday. A wonderful old selector, you don't have them anymore, and we should, because they're like talent scouts. He used to say those Wednesday fixtures were like a safety net for players. You could put a player out in his national jersey and he could fail. And you bring him in, put your arm around him and say, oh, listen, why did you fail? What did you do? And then you put him out the next Wednesday and the Wednesday after that in those games. And all of a sudden that guy's built up and now he's ready to play Test rugby. I have this belief that it takes you about 10 caps to be really comfortable in the Test arena. It's not just the pace of the game. It's not just the atmosphere. It's the whole build-up in the week. It's an incredibly emotionally straining experience, like delightful. Every atom of your being is alive. But it takes players a while to adjust to that. And how am I going to then perform at my best on Saturday? And so many ex-players say their first 2 or 3 tests they hardly remember.
Right, yeah.
You know,
it goes by in a...
It's just so emotional and so difficult. And we all have to do it. Every player that plays a test has to do that. But when you have a clump of them at one time in your team, like Ireland have, that's when you can drop your performance. So that's why I think, and I'm not criticising these players, I think these are really talented guys, and the Irish system is doing a great job pumping these really talented young men out. Just to get so many of them at one time is a challenge. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's something, as you said, I'm concerned about the game.
But ultimately, there will come a time in these very young careers where they will fail, and that's a necessary part of the journey. And essentially, the stakes are a lot higher now, and the chances of a high-profile failure are a lot higher than, say, as you said, blood them in November, they fail in November, that's completely fine. You've got a couple of months to get over that mentally. Joe Schmidt brings you back into Carton House in February, and suddenly it's making up time for those mistakes. Now we're in the area of you can't mess up.
Well, that's why you've got, excuse me, Lama, who I think Joe's really looked after. I think Joe's really nurtured him and done the right thing by him. At the beginning of the season, everyone's saying play him, I said, I was sitting at the table at home talking about it. I said if it was me, I'd blood him off the bench at Italy. And Joe did that, gave the kid the opportunity. He's not going to expose him again anymore because he's still not ready. And I've said he's not ready, and Joe thinks he's not ready. And you bring in someone like McFadden that is very, very solid player, good quality, international off the bench. That's looking after a player. The problem Ireland then have is, when do you play Jordan? When does he get his next crack? And it's certainly not going to be against England. You can't. That's sheep stations are up for grabs there. There's trophies. So it becomes the summer tour. But it is look, it's a dilemma. It's a constant dilemma for a coach, and I feel for the modern coaches in that every game is so difficult.
Yeah. It's almost a great representation of rugby, I think, that, as you say, the stakes are so high that the November internationals, I'd say in this hemisphere anyway, are viewed a lot more importantly than they are by the likes of Australia, by the All Blacks, by South Africa. That it's a great indictment of the health of the game, that every game is important at test level. Yeah.
Well, I think if you look at it, quite often, Australians and New Zealanders leave some of their best players behind. So Israel Folau didn't tour. So they just said, Izzy, you've had a long year, take the rest of the summer off. And for every player, those summer tours, they are long seasons. Anyone can say what they want, but guys are physically and emotionally exhausted on those tours, as Ireland will be coming to Australia. So some of these guys have had a Lions tour, a few weeks break, a full season, Six Nations, November Internationals. It looks like the Irish teams are going to progress deep into Europe. and then they've got to go to Australia for the best part of 6 weeks. And that's hard. You know, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's uplifting, but you get so sick of hotels, you just get so sick of being away from your family. You know, a Furlong spoke about it being on the Lions tour. It's draining in its own way. As enjoyable and exciting as it is also draining.
What are we missing, Matt, from Robbie Henshaw? Like, everything you read and hear about this guy is that he's become a real leader of that back line, and he's very vocal, and he's the one who's sort of like Sexton is hugely reliant on him being in that position and being the personality he is, and suddenly Chris Farrell is into that position, and he's a guy with a handful of caps and no experience, and he's not going to take on that role. So what are we missing, and what are our instructions to that midfield for this game?
Watching Robbie develop over the years has been a joy. He's developed into a fantastic player from the young man I saw play with Leinster. I remember saying to Victor Costello, who's that kid coming off the bench? Talking to him, and you know, he's got a bit about him, and seeing where he's come now. And what I think Ireland have a problem, obviously, since Brian Driscoll retired, we really haven't got this 13 that's been there. Now, Gary Ringrose is the man. He's just had so many problems physically staying on the field. I love watching Gary Ringrose play, and to me, the ideal pairing is Henshaw at 12 and Ringrose at 13, because really? I think they're specific in those roles. Now, Robbie, a really good 12, like Robbie, you put him at 13 and he'll do a job for you because he's such a quality player. But the positions are just too specialist. And to lose him with that experience, you now got 3 or 4 guys with very little experience. You know, they're really underdone in that back line. And it's all those things you just said. We're having the confidence to speak out. In the back line, if you don't talk to each other all the time, constantly, you fail. Because you're a unit, you're 4 guys working as one, just like the forwards are, but they're bound tight. Now, they have to communicate. But when there's space separating you, it's even more important. And the great back lines, or great teams, when you're by the sideline, you can just hear the chat the whole time. It's just constant talk, and it's not white noise, not come on boys, let's try harder. It's actually saying, I've got the ball, who have you got? You've got outside man, watch the guy at the back. The chat is non-existent, and when you stood behind the great Leinster back line I was privileged to have, even when they were boys, they were all in their early 20s, the chat's amazing. You go I went to the Canterbury Crusaders training last year, spent a few days with them, where Ronan O'Gara is now. The noise coming off the training paddock was quite astounding. Right. As in the just saying what they're seeing and having that communication. That's your biggest issue. Shane Jennings, the other week when we were doing the 2v3, the Italian game, he was on the sideline, and he said he was really surprised at the lack of talk in that second half. So what happens in the second half? Ireland concede 3 tries. So there's a great saying, stop talking, start losing. And that experience and that communication and understanding how to communicate with the guy inside you. Sometimes guys will just have a way of saying things, and you just need to play 10 games with them, 12 games, and you're on the same way. Look, Gordon Darcy and Brian, I don't know how many games they would have played at every level, and
it becomes second nature almost after a while.
It's just monosyllabic. No, it's literally no or go. Stay. It's things like that, and you fully understand what the guy means.
Yeah, so it's nothing to do with Chris Farrell's capability. It's just that actually there's a relationship to be built up there and understanding of what it takes at that level. It's interesting reading Liam Toland in the Irish Times this morning talking about the front row and the impact of that. Like, we might only end up having. So people talk about Tadhg Furlong in the context of, I was reading, his name escapes me, one of the Care Bears, former Wales prop, Jones, needless to say, in one of the papers this morning as well, talking about the loss of Furlong, and he says that loss means Wales are going to win this game. Like, we might only have 10 scrums over the course of a game, but Wales can get at this guy and drive in on him, as Liam Toland puts it in the paper this morning, and drive in on him, and in turn drive in on a weakened second row without Ian Henderson there. And that's the winning and the losing of the game.
Scrums are still vitally important, yes. Set play in rugby hasn't changed. You have to win possession. The one plus is the referees are now it was an incredible blight on the game, was you scrummaged for a penalty. So you just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until the referee was forced to give a scrum. I hated it because it's the best attacking position on the field. 16 players are tied up in this scrum and there's all this beautiful space for the backs to exploit. Recently, because so many old blokes like me have been jumping up and down and whinging about it, the international referees, I think, have been fantastic. They're saying, use it. So they're not allowing you to do that. So when a scrum's dominant, it's like, come on, get it out. And which is really great. We're seeing a lot more attacking play. 5 metres from the try line, that's different. The referee will let it play out. So they should, because that's the traditions of our game. Tolly's right. I disagree with Tolly to an extent that this young man, Porter, is not a fool. He's not someone that's coming in that I think is a long way off. I actually am excited by him in that he's the heir apparent. You've got Furlong out in front, who's a world-class player, and we've got another really good young tight
That
head.
good, right?
Yeah, he's good. A lot of the boys around the traps that know their front row play, they really rate him. Now, when he came off the bench in Italy, I was really worried. I thought, here we go. Now, the Italian scrum used to be fantastic. It's not anymore, but it's not terrible either. You know, they've held their own. They gave away a couple of bad penalties against England, but they've been okay. So against Scotland, it was not a problem. Against Ireland was not a problem. They weren't decimated and they didn't decimate Ireland. But Porter played a good 60 minutes of that game, 62 minutes I think it was. That's really good for him. I'm pretty certain this young man can come out and keep his own for an hour. And I would disagree. I think the tactics are going to be to get to best. So if you imagine you've got the 3 front rowers, and what is happening now is the Wales tight head will come at best, and the Wales hooker will come at best. And they try and stop you from lifting your foot to strike for the ball. And it's a new tactic because of this law that you have to strike for the ball. Now what Porter has to do is to not allow their loose head to get to bestie. So and then vice versa, he's got to try and go at Ken Owens. So the tactics are sort of changed a little bit because of this new law. And Greg Feek's a very good coach. He's been a highly successful coach. It's an issue, but this bloke going out in this game, he's a star of the future. He's a real deal. It's early days. He's 22, which is childish for a prop. They're not at their best till they're 25, 26. But we'll see on that one.
Man strength hasn't fully kicked in yet.
No, but he's a big dude. He's a big dude.
I don't know, was it Liam who was writing this morning as well about it was just interesting you talk about the 16 players bound into that thing, and his point was that actually frequently Wales tend not to be that bound in and tend to be sort of releasing themselves pretty early, which gives them that bit of an advantage in terms of nullifying any advantage that Ireland might get from the scrum. I guess from an Irish point of view, you need to be in the ref's ear, making him aware of that. I mean, I haven't heard too much commentary of it during the week, because generally that's the point where you tend to hear the coaches come forward and say, get that message out there that there's a tactic that they use.
Well, you heard Gregor Townsend say the referees to keep England on side. So you do try and send a message to the referee in your press conference. Definitely, you try to send a lot of messages to a lot of people in your press conference, and England are offside. But you're right. The one thing I would say with Wales, since the famous hair-bear front row has retired, Wales aren't the scrummaging force they once were. Kenny Owen's a very good technician at hooker, line. But what they do is they're messes. They walk around, they step back, they pull you around, they try and make it a bun fight. So that side of it is not good. And Ireland are doing the opposite. Ireland have gone back to some really old school, wonderful thinking where the ball, we call it channel 1 ball, the ball comes out on the left-hand side between the flanker and the number 8. So that's lightning fast ball. And Conor Murray gets it and goes quick. And what it does, it takes the back row defence out. And Ireland have been doing that a number of times, and I really love it. It's great attacking ball as someone that loves attacking rugby. So I think a bit of this is just some spin coming in from the Welsh camp, and Tolley. I know Liam very well. I coached him. He's a great writer. I love reading him, but he's just thinking as the dirty old back rower he was.
He's obsessed. He's obsessed as well. He's become obsessed by the front row. Apparently, he can't stop analysing it.
Well, he was a great cheat himself. So
become second nature.
Yeah. It's poach to come gamekeeper there.
Just a quick one, a quick couple of ones actually on Dan Biggar. So Ronan O'Gara was writing this morning And I never really thought about it like this, and it's a very simple one, that everybody's talking about this Wales team in the context of Scarlets, whereas Dan Biggar thinks a different way, and potentially there is a chance here in the backs for Wales that they get a little bit disjointed because Dan Biggar isn't in the way of Scarlets thinking.
It's a very, very good point. I think the observation of the England game was, for me, was that Wales kicked away with poor kicking a significant amount of possession. If you compare the quality of their kicking to Farrell, who so far for me is the man of the tournament, it was appalling. So even if Biggar is not on their wavelength, his kicking game is superb. You know, he's a very, very good kicker of the ball, and it's not just the kicking of the ball, it's when to kick the ball. And Wales against England kicked away all this possession within 30 metres of the try line. Now, one of them led to a try that was disallowed, but I think that when you bring in someone like Dan Biggar into that back line, it's what we were talking about before with the Irish centres. There's maturity, there's experience, and Shane Horgan has been saying this to me as well. They will push Biggar up flatter to take the ball. So it's part of the counterintuitive thinking of rugby. You want to get deeper because it gives you more time when you're a 10. The problem is that takes time and space away from the guys outside you because the defensive line's got more chance to move up. So the flatter you stand and the more pressure you put yourself under, the more space there is for the guys out wide. It's called gain line theory, and it's this really counterintuitive way of thinking. It's a wonderful. It was invented by the 1927 Waratahs when they toured Europe, and there was no Australian team. They came here and they played games that were later recognised as tests against all the nations. And there was these couple of geniuses in this side. Cyril Towers was one of them, who's Paddy Howe's grandfather, and they developed this thing called gain line theory. Now, that was 1927. It is still relevant today. It's the first thing you're talking to young 10s about is where do you position yourself to the gain line? And there becomes this other imaginary line while we're talking theory, which is the tackle line, which is where the attack and the defence meet. So the deeper I stand, the more the defence is going to come to me. So the tackle line is closer to my try line. The flatter I stand, the closer the tackle line is going to be to their try line. But it puts your skills under pressure. So I had the misfortune to be the same age as Mark Ella, and who's the greatest player I've ever seen or played against. And he only played till he was 26. He would stand literally where my the cup is there, and it was so unnerving because you'd go, hey, you go back. You know? I can almost. And he had the skills where you just could never touch him.
Sure.
But what he did was his brother was playing fullback, 4 spaces out. He would score try after try to his 2 brothers. Gary was the outside centre. Now that's the immortal. That's a Brian O'Driscoll. So let's not compare any other 10 to Mark or any other 13 to Brian. So the rest of us normal mortals have to come back a bit. But if Dan can come up a bit flatter and therefore put under pressure, Farrell. Because it's your 13 that has to make those decisions. So if your 10 stands flat, it puts the defending 13 under pressure. And if Biggar does that, we're in a bit of trouble.
The other thing on Dan Biggar, and this is, I haven't seen anybody make this point, so forgive me if I'm completely wrong here, but it was a shoulder injury that Dan Biggar is coming back from. And Warren Gatland in the press this week is all about, let's target Murray and target Sexton. And it seems like the most obvious thing in the world. Of course they're going to target that channel. But should Ireland not be targeting Dan Biggar with the ball in hand anyway? Test out that shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me, and I think they will. I wouldn't be surprised if Biggar defends as a fullback. So they take him out of the line and put him at fullback. Gaddy being Gaddy, you can only get to 9 and 10 if you get over 1 to 8.
Sure.
I always laugh when they criticise 9s because usually it means the 8 guys in front of him had an absolute shocker. You know, and he's the guy getting the blame. And it's an old saying that the forwards protect the back. So if the Irish forwards are going forward, Sexton and Murray will have a great day at the office. They're the best in the world. So why would he say that? He's just playing games. He's coached them on the lines. You know, they probably know how they do these things. Just a bit of mental stuff. I know he might put a shooter coming out on Johnny. I hope he does because Sexton's good enough just to take him completely out of the game. But Dan Biggar, everyone at this level knows each other. So I certainly expect if he defends at 10, that our big boys, Stander and our big ball carriers, Ryan, who's carried pretty well recently, coming around the corner trying to get to him, But again, if it was me, when you look at the quality of that Welsh backline, I'd be moving, protecting that shoulder, because he's the linchpin for Wales.
Yeah.
He's a really big piece, because then on the bench they've got Anscombe. If something happens to him, you bring Anscombe up, and Anscombe's not
Different game.
not the answer for them, you know.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and there's so much that goes into it in terms of those things we've spoken about. And the 3 tries against Italy that we conceded, is that indicative of a bigger problem, or did it just happen because there was a fall off in concentration? I know Andy Farrell was talking about it this week. He's pretty frustrated. Like, we can put it down to a lapse in concentration until we get the evidence, obviously, of tomorrow to decide whether it's something bigger or not, I guess.
The test arena is this incredible arena, but there's still human beings playing it, and they'll always make mistakes. Now, that game was over at half-time, bonus point delivered, and they went on and they scored very quickly in the second half. It's almost impossible to not have some form of mental, a dropping in the mental intensity. As much as no one wants to do it, it happens. And the other part is, the players who have been coached by Joe always say he sends a message in everything he does. And even if you don't want to send a message, sometimes you do. So you replace Sexton, you replace Murray, you lose Furlong, you take Henderson off, bang, and then Henshaw gets an injury. There's your 5 most influential, and your captain, Rory, was off as well. So you look through that, they're your best players. All your leadership group is running through there. You know, he had Stander on, so he's a leader as well. You can't. That just has a massive effect on a team. And they missed some bad tackles. You know, we saw them do it. Now let's put the other spin on that. Italy have scored 3 tries in 2 games against number 3 in the world and number 2 in the world. They scored 3 tries against England, 3 tries against Ireland. They're doing some good things in attack. They just couldn't tackle a fish supper. The defence is just absolutely appalling. But they're attacking quite well. Yeah. And some of the tries, not so much against Ireland, but against England, there was 2 really good tries in there, and they scored one in the first half. So we have to give the Italians some respect there with their offence. If we give them absolutely nothing with their defence, you know?
Does the worry lead you to think that Wales are going to win this game? What are you thinking?
Mate, I really, everyone's just looking forward so much to St Patrick's Day in London. This would really rain on the parade. I'm really certain Ireland, with this team, even if they put this same team out, will beat Scotland. But I'm really, really concerned about tomorrow.
I'm taking that as you think Wales are going to win.
I think Wales are favourites.
Right.
Wales are favourites. For me, Ireland will have to play at the absolute extremity of their ability and have a bit of luck to win the game.
We're all suitably concerned after that. A good reality check, Matt. Thanks a million for coming in. An absolute pleasure. It was always great to see you,
mate. Great to see you.
Thanks a lot. Speak to you again, Matt Williams. It's always a pleasure. All right.